Hello there, and welcome to the Mad Human Channel, your quiet corner of the mind where curiosity meets calm, and questions stretch out into long, winding paths of thought. Tonight, we're not drifting among neurons or tracing the hidden architecture of emotion, but instead, we're stepping into something more elusive, the strange, slippery river we call time. A river we all swim in, yet somehow, as the years pass, its waters seem to quicken. I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what's the date and time in your world right now? Share it in the comments, because it always amazes me how these small, quiet explorations ripple across so many places at once. And if tonight's journey stirs something in you, a memory, a thought, even just a moment of stillness, feel free to leave a gentle like, maybe subscribe, so you can return here when curiosity calls you back. Now, if you wish, close your eyes. Let your jaw unclench. Feel the rise and fall of your breath. Slow, steady, unhurried, like the soft pendulum of an old clock. We won't be racing ahead, but we will be looking closely at a question that has brushed against all of us. Why did childhood summers feel endless, yet the years now slip by almost unnoticed? Imagine time as a vast landscape stretching out before you. In your earliest days, you wandered slowly through it, noticing every pebble, every shadow, every leaf turning in the wind. The days felt full, wide, and bright. But now it feels as if the landscape rushes past you. Months vanish, years fold in on themselves, and somewhere deep inside, you wonder, has time truly sped up, or has something changed in you? The answer is both simple and astonishing. Time itself hasn't changed, but the way your brain perceives it has. Time has always been a curious companion in our lives, sometimes crawling with the patience of a shadow on a lazy summer afternoon, and other times sprinting like a startled deer, leaving us breathless and wondering where it all went. As children, each day felt vast and unhurried, an endless canvas where even a single week could feel like a small lifetime, every season carrying its own universe of sights, smells, and experiences that seem to stretch beyond the horizon of our understanding. Yet as we grow older, something shifts quietly but profoundly. Years begin to slip by with a velocity that feels almost unfair, birthdays stack upon each other like a fast-forwarding film reel, and memories blur into one another until the lines between last year and a decade ago seem strangely thin, and we find ourselves asking the question that has haunted generations. Why does time seem to move faster as we age? Perhaps it begins with the way our minds record experiences. For in our early years, every day is new, every sensation a first encounter, and the brain, in its eagerness, captures these moments in vivid, intricate detail, storing them in a way that stretches our perception of duration. But with age, novelty gives way to routine, and the brain, efficient yet unromantic, begins to compress familiar events into broader strokes, making entire weeks dissolve in memory as if they were single afternoons, so that even while the clock ticks at its steady, unchanging pace, our perception shrinks the span of life into something swifter, more fleeting. Scientists speak of proportional theory, noting how a single year to a 5-year-old is a massive portion of their existence, 20% of their whole life so far, while to a 50-year-old it is a mere 2%, and in that relativity lies part of the illusion, a mathematical trick of consciousness that makes the same span of time feel shorter with each passing birthday. But beyond the numbers, there is also the rhythm of living itself. As responsibilities crowd our days and our attention becomes divided among countless tasks, we spend less time truly present in the moment, allowing days to collapse into patterns of predictable repetition, the brain, marking them less distinctly than the bright, unusual events of youth. And yet, there's more, for time is also tangled with emotion. Periods of joy, novelty, and even hardship seem to expand our awareness, while neutral stretches contract it, so that a thrilling trip may feel long while it happens yet seem short in memory, while years of quiet repetition can vanish in hindsight as though they never happened at all. And perhaps that is why elders often urge the young to cherish each day, because they have lived long enough to know how mercilessly fast the calendar can turn when you stop noticing its pages. And still, in this strange acceleration of life, there is a hidden invitation to reclaim time's stretch by seeking new experiences, learning new things, breaking the routines that make our days indistinguishable, and by doing so, to awaken the mind's attention once again, slowing the inner clock even if the outer one keeps its relentless pace. For though we cannot stop time, perhaps we can change how we move through it, making each day feel as rich and full as those boundless days of childhood. Time, when we are children, feels like an endless river, stretching out wide and slow, every bend revealing a new wonder. Every day a treasure trove of discoveries so fresh that the hours seem almost incapable of running out. Summers felt eternal. School years felt like entire chapters of our existence. And even waiting for a birthday was a monumental stretch of anticipation. But somewhere along the way, something shifts. Suddenly decades begin to blur, years fly past like weeks, and before we know it, we're standing at the edge of another New Year's Eve wondering where the last 12 months have gone. This is not just nostalgia or the tricks of memory. It's a deeply human phenomenon shaped by biology, psychology, and perception. As we grow older, our brain processes time differently. When we are young, the novelty of the world means that our brain is constantly forming new memories, paying close attention to every detail. The scent of crayons in a classroom, the scratchy texture of new clothes, the thrill of running in the rain. These dense, vivid memories make those days feel full and long in retrospect. But with age, life's patterns become more familiar, our days more repetitive, and our brain no longer records each moment with the same intensity. The minutes still tick by at the same rate, but our perception shifts because there are fewer standout memories to anchor the passage of time. This is compounded by the fact that, in relative terms, each passing year becomes a smaller fraction of our total life. At 5 years old, a single year is 20% of our life, a vast chunk of existence. At 50, it's only 2%, a sliver in the grand timeline we've accumulated. Psychologists call this the proportional theory of time perception, and it's why the long summer holidays of childhood feel infinite, while summer as an adult can vanish in the blink of an eye. Yet there's more to this than just math. The neurochemistry of our brains changes too. Dopamine, the chemical that lights up our sense of excitement and novelty, is released in larger bursts when we are young, making events feel more intense and memorable. As we age, dopamine release diminishes, making our experiences feel less fresh and, in turn, less likely to stretch our perception of time. Add to this the routines of adult life, commutes, chores, meetings, and you have a recipe for days that feel monotonous and weeks that seem to merge into each other without edges. But here's the twist. The way to slow down time isn't to wish for youth again. It's to bring back novelty into our lives. Studies have shown that when we deliberately seek out new experiences, learn unfamiliar skills, or travel to places we've never been, our brain begins to code those days with the same richness it once did in childhood. This creates the illusion of time expanding again, even if we can't reverse the actual ticking of the clock. In a sense, we hold the keys to bending our perception of time, not by changing the clock's speed, but by changing how we fill the moments between each tick and tock. Alright, let's continue the script in the same long, continuous paragraph style without breaking flow, keeping the poetic yet curiosity-driven tone consistent so it feels like one uninterrupted journey through the mind and the nature of time, where each sentence drifts into the next like an unbroken river of thought, where our understanding of why time seems to accelerate with age doesn't begin with a clock but with the strange and shifting way our brain experiences moments. Because the seconds on a watch are fixed, unchanging, ticking away with mechanical precision, but our perception of those seconds is elastic, stretching and contracting depending on our age, emotions, and experiences, so that a summer afternoon as a child could feel like a whole season in itself, the minutes dripping slowly, each one full of discovery, while a summer afternoon as an adult might vanish between lunch and a single email reply. And this is not just nostalgia or romantic memory, but a measurable phenomenon tied to the way our brain encodes and retrieves information, because when we are young, every experience is novel, every sight, sound, and smell is raw and unprocessed, demanding that the brain build rich neural pathways to store it, which makes the memory dense and expansive. So when we look back, that time feels vast and full, but as we age, routine replaces novelty, and the brain begins to compress time, storing it more efficiently but in a way that feels shorter in hindsight. Mechanism not of loss but of optimization, though its side effect is this haunting sense of acceleration, and scientists have linked this to both the proportional theory, where each year is a smaller percentage of our total life lived, making it feel shorter. And to the neurological processing speed, which subtly declines with age, so our internal metronome ticks more slowly, paradoxically making the outside world appear to move faster. And yet there is also the emotional dimension, because moments heavy with emotion, whether joy, fear, or heartbreak, seem to slow the clock, pulling us into a heightened state of awareness, whereas long stretches of predictability pass in a blur. So perhaps the speeding up of life is not a simple inevitability but a signal to reclaim novelty, to break patterns, to seek moments that surprise the brain into paying full attention again. And here lies the paradox of time perception. Though we cannot slow the physical clock, we can alter our experience of it, expanding moments through mindfulness, curiosity, and deliberate change. A truth both comforting and urgent. For if we do nothing, the years will slip past like water through open fingers. But if we pay attention, if we fill our days with the richness of the unexpected, perhaps we can return, in some small way, to the long afternoons of childhood where the sun lingered and time itself seemed to wait for us to catch. Up.it begins almost unnoticed, like the quiet slipping away of a sunset while you're still deep in conversation. The colors fading before you even realize they were there, and suddenly you look up and the sky has already turned dark. That is how time begins to change for us. Not all at once, but in slow, subtle shifts, creeping into the way we live, the way we remember, the way we measure the moments that make up our lives. As children, every day seemed to stretch on forever. Summers lasted an eternity, and waiting for a birthday felt like an impossible journey. Back then, the spaces between events were wide and bright, each moment filled with something entirely new, something you had never seen or felt before. But as we grow, the rhythm changes. We fall into patterns, we repeat our days, and the once vast landscape of time begins to shrink into a narrow corridor where the seasons blur. The years blend, and suddenly you're asking yourself, wasn't it just January? Scientists have tried to explain this strange compression. They say that when we are young, every experience is novel, and the brain records newness with vivid detail, making time feel long and expansive. But as we age, our lives fill with repetition, and the brain stops paying such close attention. Fewer new memories are created, so the years seem to slip by and fast forward. But science only captures part of it. The rest lies in the way we live those years. Time is not just measured by clocks or calendars, but by the weight of moments and the depth of our presence within them. When we live on autopilot, time passes unnoticed. When we immerse ourselves fully, it slows, deepens, and expands. And perhaps this is why, as adults, we wake up one day and realize that the last decade feels like it vanished in a blink. Because somewhere along the way, the moments stopped being counted individually and started being filed away in bulk, each year feeling like a single, indistinct page. This is why our childhood summers still seem endless in our memory, while our adult years blur like streaks of light in a time-lapse video. But there is more to the story, something older than science, something woven into the human condition. An ancient truth hidden in the way we measure our lives not only by what we've done, but by the way we felt while doing it. And so, as the days seem to rush past us like leaves caught in a swift autumn breeze, the question deepens. Why is it that the long summers of childhood felt endless, while the years of adulthood slip by almost unnoticed? Part of the answer lies in the way our brains encode and measure time, and here's where the science begins to reveal its strange poetry. When we are young, every experience is new. Every corner of life is unfamiliar terrain waiting to be mapped, and our brains, in their eagerness, record these fresh impressions in meticulous detail. A single summer afternoon could be packed with 100 novel sensations. The scent of wet grass after rain, the sticky taste of a melting popsicle, the shock of cold water on bare skin, and each of these moments is etched into memory as something unique. The richer the memory, the longer it feels in retrospect, and so childhood becomes a vast, sprawling landscape in our minds. But as we grow older, our days become less about discovery and more about repetition. The world's colors don't fade, but they become familiar, and familiarity requires fewer mental snapshots. The brain, efficient as ever, stops recording every detail, and instead compresses these moments into broader strokes. A week at the office may leave behind only a handful of distinct memories, while an entire year can blur into a seamless stretch. This compression creates the illusion that time itself has accelerated, when in fact, our perception of it has simply changed. Neuroscientists call this proportional theory. When you are 5 years old, a single year is a vast 20% of your life. At 50, it's just 2%, and so it feels smaller, less substantial. Psychologists also point to the role of attention. When our minds are engaged, fully present in the moment, time feels slower. When we operate on autopilot, hours dissolve without a trace. Technology, with its endless stream of stimuli, often steals our attention from the present, trapping us in a cycle of distraction that makes days feel shorter and years vanish before we notice. This is why vacations, new hobbies, or even small changes in routine can stretch time again. They reintroduce novelty into the brain's calendar, forcing it to pause, notice, and record. And here's the bittersweet truth. The feeling that life is speeding up is a sign not that we're losing time, but that we've become so familiar with its patterns that we've stopped savoring them. The solution isn't to try to slow the clock. It's to live in a way that fills it with enough texture, variation, and presence that when we look back, we see not a blur but a mosaic of moments, each distinct and worth remembering. And so, the faster time seems to pass, the more it calls on us to treat each day not as a repetition of the last, but as a chance to create something new, so that in memory, our years can once again feel as vast and endless as the summers of our youth. And as the years pass, we begin to realize that time itself feels different, almost as if it has slipped into a faster gear, rushing past us in a blur of birthdays, seasons, and quiet mornings that seem to vanish before we even notice they've arrived. Childhood was an endless expanse. Summer vacations felt like whole lifetimes, school years stretched on forever, and a single day was a vast ocean of moments waiting to be filled. But somewhere along the way, without warning, the days began to shrink. Weeks started collapsing into each other. Months passed as quickly as weekends once did, and entire years slipped through our fingers like dry sand. Psychologists have long observed the strange acceleration of perceived time, and while it may feel like magic, or perhaps a cruel trick of nature, there are deep and fascinating reasons why our brains measure time differently at different stages of life. One theory points to the proportionality of our experiences. When you're 5 years old, a single year is 20% of your entire life. At 50, it's just 2%. Our brains seem to intuitively register this ratio, making each passing year feel shorter simply because it's a smaller fraction of the life we've lived. But proportion is only part of the story. There's also the matter of novelty and memory density. In our youth, nearly every experience is fresh. New places, new skills, new people, and the excitement of constant firsts. These moments demand more cognitive processing, laying down rich, detailed memories that make time feel full and expanded in hindsight. As we grow older, routine settles in. Days begin to mirror each other, tasks repeat, and the brain, always efficient, stops recording the fine details. Time becomes compressed in memory, and so, looking back, months feel like weeks. Neuroscientists also suspect that our internal biological clocks, the rhythms governed by the brain's suprachiasmatic nucleus, shift subtly with age. Reaction times slow, metabolic processes change, and the neural mechanisms we use to track duration start to drift, creating the sensation that external time is moving faster. There's even evidence that dopamine, a neurotransmitter crucial for time perception, declines over the years, altering the way we measure moments internally. All of this blends into a strange truth. The more familiar our world becomes, the less space-time seems to occupy. And so we find ourselves wondering why the first day of school is vivid even decades later, but last Tuesday feels like a blur we can barely recall. This perception has profound implications for how we live. If novelty slows the clock, perhaps the secret to stretching time is not in holding on to the past, but in continually seeking new experiences, breaking patterns, and allowing life to surprise us again. Travel somewhere unfamiliar. Learn a skill that forces your brain to engage deeply. Meet people whose stories you've never heard. In doing so, we feed the mind fresh input, and in return, time gives us back its fullness. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Physicists have their own angle on this phenomenon, and it has little to do with neurons and everything to do with the nature of time itself. In Einstein's relativity, time is not a universal constant. It is woven into the fabric of space, bending and stretching depending on speed and gravity. While this doesn't directly explain our personal aging perception, it's a humbling reminder that time is not as fixed as we like to think. Some philosophers argue that our subjective sense of time is a private reality, a deeply personal timeline we carry inside us. It may not match the ticking of the clock, but in a way, that's what makes it ours. Still, no matter how much science and philosophy illuminate, the lived reality remains. As candles crowd our birthday cakes, the years between them seem to arrive more quickly. The challenge is not to stop this acceleration, we can't, but to make sure those years are rich enough that when we look back, they don't collapse into a thin, forgettable line, but instead stretch out like a tapestry woven with color, detail, and the sweet weight of moments fully lived. And perhaps the greatest irony of all is that in learning how to savor time, we discover that even as it speeds past us, we can slow it down in our hearts, not by clinging to it, but by filling it so completely that it lingers long after it's gone, echoing through the corridors of memory like sunlight that stays warm even after the day has ended. And as the years pass, we begin to realize that time itself feels different, almost as if it has slipped into a faster gear, rushing past us in a blur of birthdays, seasons, and quiet mornings that seem to vanish before we even notice they've arrived. Childhood was an endless expanse. Summer vacations felt like whole lifetimes, school years stretched on forever, and a single day was a vast ocean of moments waiting to be filled. But somewhere along the way, without warning, the days began to shrink. Weeks started collapsing into each other. Months passed as quickly as weekends once did, and entire years slipped through our fingers like dry sand. Psychologists have long observed the strange acceleration of perceived time, and while it may feel like magic, or perhaps a cruel trick of nature, there are deep and fascinating reasons why our brains measure time differently at different stages of life. One theory points to the proportionality of our experiences. When you're 5 years old, a single year is 20% of your entire life. At 50, it's just 2%. Our brains seem to intuitively register this ratio, making each passing year feel shorter simply because it's a smaller fraction of the life we've lived. But proportion is only part of the story. There's also the matter of novelty and memory density. In our youth, nearly every experience is fresh. New places, new skills, new people, and the excitement of constant firsts. These moments demand more cognitive processing, laying down rich, detailed memories that make time feel full and expanded in hindsight. As we grow older, routine settles in. Days begin to mirror each other, tasks repeat, and the brain, always efficient, stops recording the fine details. Time becomes compressed in memory, and so, looking back, months feel like weeks. Neuroscientists also suspect that our internal biological clocks, the rhythms governed by the brain's suprachiasmatic nucleus, shift subtly with age. Reaction times slow, metabolic processes change, and the neural mechanisms we use to track duration start to drift, creating the sensation that external time is moving faster. There's even evidence that dopamine, a neurotransmitter crucial for time perception, declines over the years, altering the way we measure moments internally. All of this blends into a strange truth. The more familiar our world becomes, the less space-time seems to occupy. And so we find ourselves wondering why the first day of school is vivid even decades later, but last Tuesday feels like a blur we can barely recall. This perception has profound implications for how we live. If novelty slows the clock, perhaps the secret to stretching time is not in holding on to the past, but in continually seeking new experiences, breaking patterns, and allowing life to surprise us again. Travel somewhere unfamiliar. Learn a skill that forces your brain to engage deeply. Meet people whose stories you've never heard. In doing so, we feed the mind fresh input, and in return, time gives us back its fullness. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Physicists have their own angle on this phenomenon, and it has little to do with neurons and everything to do with the nature of time itself. In Einstein's relativity, time is not a universal constant. It is woven into the fabric of space, bending and stretching depending on speed and gravity. While this doesn't directly explain our personal aging perception, it's a humbling reminder that time is not as fixed as we like to think. Some philosophers argue that our subjective sense of time is a private reality, a deeply personal timeline we carry inside us. It may not match the ticking of the clock, but in a way, that's what makes it ours. Still, no matter how much science and philosophy illuminate, the lived reality remains. As candles crowd our birthday cakes, the years between them seem to arrive more quickly. The challenge is not to stop this acceleration, we can't, but to make sure those years are rich enough that when we look back, they don't collapse into a thin, forgettable line, but instead stretch out like a tapestry woven with color, detail, and the sweet weight of moments fully lived. And perhaps the greatest irony of all is that in learning how to savor time, we discover that even as it speeds past us, we can slow it down in our hearts, not by clinging to it, but by filling it so completely that it lingers long after it's gone, echoing through the corridors of memory like sunlight that stays warm even after the day has ended. And so, as we trace the long arc of our years, we begin to notice that the rhythm of time itself seems to shift beneath our feet, almost imperceptibly at first, like a river whose current grows swifter without our realizing it, until one day we look back and find that entire seasons, once so full and sprawling, have compressed into a handful of indistinct memories, and this strange acceleration is not an illusion but a deeply human perception rooted in the architecture of our mind, the way our brain processes novelty and familiarity. For in childhood each day is an adventure into unknown territory, every sight, sound, and sensation a fresh imprint on an uncluttered canvas. And so time stretches to accommodate the weight of these new experiences, while in adulthood the days begin to rhyme with each other, repeating in familiar patterns, and the brain, ever efficient, records them with less vividness, compressing their footprint in memory, making months feel like weeks and years like seasons. And perhaps this is why our first decade seems so vast compared to the later ones, because when we are young, even the smallest things, a first snowfall, the smell of rain, the feel of a loose tooth, are monumental, but as we age, those same things no longer command the same awe, becoming mere background noise to a life crowded with obligations, routines, and repetitions, and so the richness of the moment is replaced with a kind of autopilot mode where the mind anticipates the next thing before fully inhabiting the present. Yet this is not the whole story, for science tells us that the proportional theory of time perception also plays its part. When you are 5, a single year is 20% of your entire life, a vast fraction. While at 50, that same year is just 2%, and so it naturally feels shorter in comparison. But there is also the way attention and emotion warp our internal clock, how moments of fear, excitement, or anticipation stretch into eternity, while weeks of mundane routine collapse into a blur, and perhaps this is why a long, lazy summer in childhood feels endless while a month of back-to-back adult work deadlines disappears almost without trace. And then there is the matter of novelty, for novelty forces the brain to record more detail, and the more detail it stores, the longer the moment feels in retrospect, which is why travel, learning, or breaking routine can make time feel slower again, almost like it did in youth. But for many, adulthood becomes a landscape of sameness, where one day's edges dissolve into the next, until years pass with alarming speed, and if we think about it, our relationship with time is not a simple countdown on a clock but a deeply personal, elastic experience, shaped by the interplay of memory, attention, emotion, and meaning. And so the older we get, the more urgent it becomes to disrupt the monotony, to plant moments of wonder, risk, and beauty into our lives. For it is in these disruptions that time dilates again, and the days regain their weight. Not because the minutes have changed, but because we have changed the way we meet them, and perhaps the bittersweet truth is that this acceleration of time with age is not a curse but a quiet reminder, a reminder that our days are finite, that the river will keep rushing faster, and that if we wish to slow it down, we must step into it differently, with open eyes and a willingness to see the familiar as if for the first time. And so we begin to realize that slowing time is less about controlling the clock and more about deepening our presence within it, for the seconds and minutes will march on with mechanical precision, but our experience of them will always be fluid, expanding when we immerse ourselves fully and contracting when we drift through them half-aware, and this truth holds a kind of quiet power because while we cannot stop the years from passing, We can change the texture of how they are lived, and perhaps that is the true art of time. To create moments so rich in sensation, emotion, and meaning that they linger in our memory as if they were far longer than they actually were. Like a summer evening where the sky blushed for hours, or a conversation that seemed to hold the whole universe in its pauses. And science confirms this strange magic, showing that when the mind is given novelty, challenge, or deep emotional engagement, it records more frames of the experience, and when we look back, it feels as though time had slowed. In that moment, and this explains why our most vivid memories are rarely from days spent scrolling through screens or following the same routine, but from moments when something shifted, when we were pulled into the present so completely that the rest of the world seemed to fade. And in this way, time is less like a conveyor belt carrying us forward and more like a tapestry we are weaving. Some parts thick with intricate patterns, others thin and empty, and it is up to us to decide how much of the cloth will be rich and textured. For if we allow life to become an unbroken rhythm of sameness, the months will blur into a haze, but if we dare to break the rhythm, by learning a new skill, traveling somewhere unfamiliar, speaking to someone whose story we've never heard, we plant anchors in our memory that slow the current, and in doing so, we stretch the subjective length of our life, giving ourselves more to look back upon, more to feel, and more to cherish, and maybe this is why the wisest people do not simply count their years but measure their days and moments. Because they understand that time will always slip away, but it will slip more slowly when each day is made strange, beautiful, or sacred in its own way. And as we move further into life, we start to see that our relationship with time is deeply tied to how we pay attention. For attention is the gatekeeper of memory, and memory is what gives time its shape. Without memory, days dissolve into nothingness, and without attention, memories are never formed. So it is no wonder that when we are young, when every sight, sound, and experience is fresh, our minds are like cameras snapping hundreds of detailed frames each day, making those early years feel vast and endless in retrospect. But as adults, routine strips away the novelty, and the brain, always trying to conserve energy, stops recording in high detail, storing only the broad strokes of each passing day. And so the years speed up in our perception, slipping by like pages in a book we barely skimmed. Yet this is not an irreversible fate, for by simply breaking patterns, taking a different route home, trying a hobby that challenges us, seeking conversations that surprise us, we can nudge the brain back into a state of heightened awareness, and in that state, minutes grow heavier, denser, more substantial, so that when we look back, the days seem longer and fuller, and perhaps this is the great secret that aging tries to hide from us. That while we cannot stop the clock, we can stretch the ribbon of time within our minds, making a year feel like 2 or 3 if we dare to fill it with enough wonder. And in doing so, we not only slow time's feeling but also deepen its meaning, because the truth is, the length of a life is not measured solely in years, but in how much life is packed into those years. And while the calendar will always march forward at its steady pace, the mind's calendar is flexible, elastic, and entirely ours to shape. And so, the real question becomes not why does time feel faster as we age, but what can we do to make it slow down again? Because while the ticking of a clock is unchanging, our perception of those ticks is fluid, a living thing shaped by novelty, emotion, and engagement, and when we stop seeking newness, our brain stops marking time in rich detail, compressing whole months into a blur. But when we deliberately reintroduce variety, traveling to an unfamiliar city, learning a new skill, surrounding ourselves with people who inspire or challenge us, our brain is forced to take notice, to lay down thicker, more detailed memory traces, which in turn makes those days feel longer when we recall them. And this is why a single week spent exploring somewhere new can feel longer in memory than the previous 3 months combined. For we are tricking our perception into believing more time has passed simply by giving it more moments worth remembering. And the beautiful part is that this doesn't require grand, life-altering changes. Sometimes it's as small as cooking a recipe you've never tried, watching the sunset from a different place, or even taking a walk without your phone, truly observing the world around you. Because time slows down in direct proportion to how much of it you actually notice. And if there's one truth that cuts through all the science and philosophy, it's this. Time is only as fast as the life we fill it with, and when we choose to live deliberately, not just exist, we discover that the rush of years can be softened into a gentle, lingering flow, each moment thick with presence, each day stretching far beyond the clock's measure. And if we look even deeper, we realize that this shifting perception of time is also tied to the way our sense of self changes over the years, because when we are young, every experience is a first, and firsts carry a kind of psychological weight that imprints deeply into our memory, stretching those moments in our minds. But as we grow older, the number of firsts naturally declines: school, first job, first love, first home. Each milestone passes and routine quietly takes over, causing our internal calendar to blur, and without those distinct markers, the mind compresses time, making years feel like months and months like weeks. And yet, the paradox is that by consciously creating more firsts, even later in life, we can recapture that feeling of spacious, abundant time, for novelty is a kind of temporal anchor that keeps the present from drifting away unnoticed. And this is why people who continuously reinvent themselves, travel, learn languages, or embrace new challenges often say that life feels longer to them, because their brain is constantly being forced to slow down and pay attention, while those who live in unchanging patterns often feel the years slip past in a blink. And here lies the quiet truth. Time is not something happening to us. It is something we are actively shaping with every choice, every habit, every perspective, and if we want the days to stretch again, we must dare to live them differently, not simply let them happen while we watch time. It's the quietest thief we know, yet the most constant companion we carry, always there, always ticking, always moving. Forward without hesitation, without mercy, without any sign of slowing down just because we plead for one more moment. And as children, it felt infinite, stretching endlessly like a summer afternoon that refused to end. Each day a vast landscape filled with small discoveries and big feelings. And yet, somewhere along the way, something happened. Days began to feel shorter, years started to slip away almost unnoticed, and you might look back now and wonder how an entire decade could vanish in what feels like a breath. And there's a strange ache that comes with that realization, because while we may measure time in seconds, minutes, and hours, our minds don't feel it that way. They measure it in experiences, in changes, in the density of memories. And the truth is, as we grow older, novelty fades. Our lives become built on patterns, routines, and familiarity, and this is where the illusion begins. When you are young, everything is new, every sound, taste, and sight is a first-time experience, and your brain, hungry and electric, stores these moments with intense detail, creating the feeling that time is abundant. But when adulthood settles in, the days blur because your mind no longer feels the need to catalog every repeated event. It becomes efficient, compressing familiar days into mental snapshots rather than full reels, and so, a year filled with sameness feels shorter than a year packed with adventure, which explains why school days felt long but summer holidays as an adult vanish almost instantly. And science has even shown us that the more new experiences we have, the slower time feels. A phenomenon tied to the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for forming new memories, which becomes less stimulated when life is predictable, meaning your perception of time is literally altered by how much you break routine. And then there's the proportional theory. When you were 5 years old, a single year was 20% of your entire existence, an enormous fraction that felt monumental, but by the time you are 50, that same year is only 2% of your life, a much smaller slice of your personal timeline, and your brain naturally scales it as less significant, compressing it in your memory like a book with fewer pages for that chapter. And this scaling is subtle, creeping in without you noticing, until suddenly you're reminiscing about last year only to realize it was 5 years ago, and you feel that shock in your chest because time seemed to leap forward when you weren't looking. And yet, there's more. Our internal clocks are not mechanical. They are biological, influenced by metabolism, neural processing speeds, and even dopamine levels, all of which change with age, and research suggests that as we get older, our brains process sensory information more slowly, meaning the present moment feels less dense with data, and without that richness, time seems to pass more quickly in retrospect. And here's a detail that's both poetic and tragic. Children often feel time moving slowly because their brains are overclocked with curiosity, scanning and recording every detail, while adults, burdened with responsibilities and dulled by repetition, operate on autopilot, allowing entire weeks to vanish without forming a single standout memory. And this is why vacations seem to last longer in memory than the same amount of time spent at work. Novelty stretches time in the mind while routine compresses it, and if you think back to a particularly eventful year, perhaps the year you moved to a new city, started a new relationship, or took a once-in-a-lifetime trip, you'll likely remember it as feeling longer, because your brain stored more unique experiences from that period, each acting like a bookmark that slows the perception of the passage of time. And what's fascinating is that we can hack this system. By consciously introducing novelty, learning new skills, traveling to unfamiliar places, meeting new people, even rearranging your environment, you can slow your perception of time, not in reality of course, the clock still moves forward, but in the richness of how you experience it. And some psychologists even suggest that this is the key to feeling like you have more life, to fill your days with variety so they expand in memory, giving you the illusion of a slower life, which might be the closest thing we have to bending time itself. And yet, as much as we might try to slow it, time remains a river. One we can never dam, never reverse, only choose how to sail upon, and perhaps this is why older people often say life is short, because they felt the acceleration, the increasing blur, and they wish they had understood sooner that the speed of time in our minds is tied to the way we live, not just the ticking of a clock. And so the real question becomes not why time feels faster as we age, though science can explain that, but what we will do with that knowledge now that we have it. Because maybe the real tragedy isn't that time flies, but that we stop paying attention to the view as it passes by, and in that awareness lies the quiet power to make the days feel long again. Time is a strange companion. When we are children, it feels infinite, stretching out like a vast summer's day that refuses to end, where hours are oceans and each second drips like honey, slow and deliberate. Yet as we grow older, the same hours seem to collapse in on themselves, speeding by in a blur, and before we know it, weeks, months, even years vanish with a swiftness that leaves us breathless and slightly unsettled, as though we've misplaced something precious but can't quite remember where. Scientists, philosophers, and poets have all grappled with this phenomenon, and while the emotional truth of it feels universal, the explanation is tangled in biology, psychology, and perception. Our brains, remarkable as they are, process experiences differently depending on our age, novelty, and attention. When we are young, almost everything we encounter is new. Our first snowfall, our first heartbreak, our first taste of something so sour it makes our eyes water, and the novelty forces our brain to work harder, laying down thicker, more vivid memories, which in turn makes those days feel fuller, longer, richer. But as we grow older, life settles into patterns, routines take over, and our brains, efficient to a fault, begin to compress time, filtering out the repetitive, familiar details as though they are background noise. So instead of experiencing each day in high resolution, we skim across them like stones across water, touching only briefly before moving on. The strange thing is that in the moment, time doesn't always feel like it's racing. It's only when we look back, when we realize another year has passed, that we feel the acceleration, and this is partly due to how our memory works. The more densely packed with new events a period of life is, the longer it will seem in retrospect, which explains why a single summer at age 10 can feel longer in memory than the past 5 years combined. There's also the matter of proportionality. When you are 5 years old, 1 year is a massive 20% of your life, but by the time you are 50, a year is only 2%, and though our brains don't consciously calculate such percentages, we feel them deep down as a kind of shrinking ratio of lived experience. Add to that the fact that our biological clocks change with age, dopamine production, which is closely tied to our perception of time and novelty, tends to decrease, making days feel less exciting and, therefore, shorter, and our metabolic process is also slow, subtly influencing the tempo of our internal sense of time. Then there's attention. When we are stressed, distracted, or endlessly multitasking, our awareness of the present moment fades, and without mindful engagement, days dissolve into an indistinguishable haze, making us feel as though they've slipped through our fingers unnoticed. Yet the paradox is that when we're deeply bored, waiting for a bus in the rain with nothing to do, time can drag painfully, while in hindsight, those hours vanish from our memory almost entirely, leaving no trace, so they contribute to the sense of time having flown. Cultures, too, have their own clocks. Industrialized societies with tight schedules and constant digital stimulation condition us to live in a state of perpetual hurry, while slower-paced cultures often perceive time differently, stretching it out like a slow meal shared among friends. If we want to slow time again, to return to that childlike expansiveness, the key may be in breaking the monotony, seeking novelty, practicing mindfulness, and filling our days with intentional, memorable moments. Because the truth is, time itself doesn't speed up or slow down. The ticking of the clock remains constant, but our perception of it is elastic, shaped by attention, emotion, and memory. And though we cannot stop the years from passing, we can, perhaps, learn to live them in a way that feels longer, richer, and more fully our own, so that when we look back, the calendar will not seem like a blur, but a tapestry of vivid, uncompressed days, each one stitched with moments that made time stretch once more. Time is a river, but not the kind that flows with predictable ripples over smooth stones. It is a river that seems to change its current depending on where you stand along its banks, moving lazily when you are a child splashing in the shallows, and yet somehow roaring past with relentless speed when you grow older and find yourself in deeper waters. And the strange thing, the thing that makes people pause in their middle years or later and ask, "Where did it all go?" is that the clock itself never changes its rhythm. The seconds tick at the same pace for a 5-year-old as they do for a 50-year-old, and yet our experience of them bends and stretches like light through glass, leaving us with the eerie sensation that our childhood summers lasted forever while our adult years vanish in a blink. Scientists have wrestled with this phenomenon for centuries, philosophers have mused about it, poets have lamented it, and modern neuroscience offers one of the most compelling explanations. When we are young, every moment is new, novel, bursting with firsts. First steps, first friends, first heartbreaks, first discoveries about the shape of the world. And novelty commands our attention like a magnet, forcing our brains to process more sensory data, lay down more detailed memories, and in doing so, make time feel stretched, richer, slower. But as we age, novelty fades, life falls into familiar patterns. Our commutes blur into one another. The faces at the grocery store become unremarkable, and our brains, efficient to a fault, compress the repetitive experiences into smaller memory files, leaving fewer reference points when we look back, so that a decade in adulthood might feel shorter in retrospect than a single school year did in childhood. The days themselves aren't shorter, but our perception is edited by the mind's archivist, and this compression is compounded by proportionality. When you are 5 years old, a single year is a fifth of your entire existence, a vast chunk of your story. But when you are 50, that same year is only 1/50th, a mere sliver, and so it naturally feels smaller, less significant, and yet the human heart still craves the depth of those earlier days, and perhaps that is why many adults seek novelty again in travel, in learning new skills, in changing careers, because novelty doesn't just make life interesting, it slows the subjective speed of time, and this slowing is tied not just to newness but to attention. When we are fully present, absorbed in the moment, whether we are watching a sunset, playing with a child, or tasting something extraordinary, time seems to dilate, and conversely, when we are distracted, scrolling endlessly through our phones or moving on autopilot through routine, whole days can vanish without a trace. Researchers have even shown that adrenaline, fear, and heightened emotion can expand our perception of a moment, which is why terrifying events seem to last longer than they actually do, and this suggests that part of the key to slowing time is emotional engagement. Memory also plays a central role because time as we experience it is not just about the present moment but also about how we encode and recall our past. And older adults often report that although time seems to speed up as the years pass, their distant memories, especially vivid, emotional, or novel ones, remain sharp, like islands in a rushing stream. And so one way to hack the flow of time is to consciously create more of those islands by seeking experiences worth remembering, by deliberately stepping out of the well-worn paths of habit. And yet there's a paradox here. While novelty can slow time as we experience it, too much novelty without pause can overwhelm us. So the art of living slowly is about finding balance. Enough familiarity to feel grounded, enough novelty to stretch the mind. Some cultures have intuitively grasped this, building rituals that mark the passage of time with seasonal festivals, rites of passage, and storytelling, all of which anchor memory and slow perception, while our modern, hurried culture tends to erase such markers, replacing them with the monotony of identical days. And yet, within the individual mind, there is a power to resist, through mindfulness, intentional living, and the conscious creation of moments that will matter years from now, because while we cannot literally stop the clock, we can expand the way we feel it, stretching it like taffy so that even a short life feels full. And the strange comfort in all of this is that the feeling of time speeding up is not a failing of willpower or some inevitable curse of aging, but a natural function of how our brains process life, and knowing this gives us a choice. To live passively and let years slip by in a blur, or to live deliberately, making the moments so rich, so textured, that they resist compression in memory, leaving us, in the end, with the sense not just that we lived a long life but that we lived a deep one. And yet, as we move further along the timeline of our lives, each passing season feels less like a long journey and more like a brief flicker, a flash in the vast cinema reel of existence, where years compress into moments and moments dissolve into memory before we've even had the chance to hold them still. It is as if the mind, that once measured time in the wide-eyed wonder of childhood summers and endless afternoons, now counts it in the quick, clipped beats of routine, the way a song you've heard 1,000 times seems to play faster because you already know the melody, because novelty has faded and predictability has taken its place. And in this shift lies the strange truth. Time does not actually move faster, but our perception of it changes, our mental metronome ticking differently as experience accumulates, shrinking the width of each perceived moment until decades feel like pages being rifled through by invisible hands, and scientists suggest that this happens because the brain encodes new experiences with greater density when they are unfamiliar, and so a child's single day feels monumental because it is packed with unique impressions, while an adult's day, often a repetition of many before it, leaves fewer imprints in memory and thus feels, in retrospect, shorter. And if you think of life as a book, the early chapters are rich with detail, every page a surprise, but as the plot stabilizes and the setting becomes familiar, fewer words are needed to describe it, and so the chapters, our years, turn more quickly, making the middle and later sections of our story feel as though they're racing toward the end, and this illusion is compounded by the proportional theory of time perception, where a year to a 10-year-old is a tenth of their life, but to a 50-year-old it is only 1/50th, a sliver so thin that it seems to vanish almost as soon as it begins. And perhaps this is why we find ourselves startled by how quickly milestones arrive. Birthdays, anniversaries, the changing of decades. Each one a quiet reminder that the clock on the wall is ticking at the same pace it always has. Yet the clock inside our mind is running ahead, hurrying us toward a horizon we cannot see but know is there. And so we begin to chase moments more intentionally, trying to slow them down with novelty, with travel, with learning new skills, with stepping outside the predictable corridors of our daily life, because each time we break the routine we carve deeper marks into memory, stretching time not in reality but in our perception of it, making a year feel fuller, longer, more lived. And perhaps the secret to slowing time is not in wishing for more hours, but in filling the ones we have with enough richness that they resist slipping away unnoticed, because when we pay attention, truly pay attention to the world around us, from the way light filters through the leaves to the subtle changes in a loved one's smile, time feels less like a river sweeping us forward and more like a lake where we can pause, if only for a moment, and watch the ripples spread outward, until those ripples touch the farthest edges of memory, where even the faintest moments are stored like pressed flowers between the pages of a book, fragile yet eternal, their colors still holding whispers of the sunlight that once fell upon them. And here lies the paradox. While the body moves relentlessly forward through the hours and years, the mind can bend back upon itself, wandering through these preserved fragments, reliving them not as faded echoes but as living tapestries. A childhood morning can be recalled in such vivid clarity that it feels closer than yesterday. The smell of wet earth after rain more immediate than the coffee on your desk right now. This is because time in memory is not linear. It folds, it loops, it dances. We may think we are moving in one direction, but our inner world is an ocean of currents, some pulling us forward, others carrying us far back, and some drifting in the stillness between. And yet, even knowing this, we often treat time as something to be hoarded or spent wisely, as though it were a currency with a fixed balance. But unlike money, which can be saved or invested, time is more like breath. You cannot store it, you can only use it in the moment it is given. The more we try to save it by rushing, by cutting corners, by skipping the quiet details of life, the more it slips through our grasp unnoticed. In our hurry to be efficient, we may reach the end of the day having accomplished much but experienced little. This is why some philosophers insist that the true measure of life is not in how long we live but in how deeply we live. Depth comes from presence, from lingering in conversations instead of checking the clock, from watching the slow unfurling of a flower rather than merely noting that it has bloomed. It comes from tasting a meal instead of simply eating it, from listening to a piece of music not just as background noise but as a story told in sound. Every time we step into such awareness, we are stretching our perception of time, slowing its pace within us. The minutes may still pass at their steady rate, but the mind, flooded with detail and novelty, records them as fuller, richer, and thus longer. But there is another side to this, the strange elasticity of time in moments of crisis or danger. Ask anyone who has been in an accident or faced a sudden life-threatening situation, and they may tell you that time seemed to slow to an almost unbearable crawl. This is not an illusion born of fear alone. It is the brain's heightened awareness capturing every possible detail, as if trying to record enough information to ensure survival. In such moments, the seconds are stretched wide, the gaps between them heavy with clarity. And though we do not wish for danger, this phenomenon hints at a truth. The more intensely we attend to the present, the more expansive time becomes in our minds. If we can learn to summon that same intensity in ordinary life without the shadow of threat, we can, in a sense, reclaim the vastness of our days. This is what poets and artists have always known. To notice deeply is to live fully, and to live fully is to resist the quickening current of time. It is not a fight we can win forever, for the river always leads to the sea, but we can, for a while, slow our drift, anchor ourselves in moments worth remembering, and give them the dignity of our undivided attention, because in the end, it is these anchored moments that become the true architecture of our lives. They are the quiet pillars that hold up the vast, invisible structure of memory, giving shape to what would otherwise be a blur of days. Without them, years can vanish in retrospect, collapsing into a single indistinct block, just as a long, unbroken stretch of road becomes a single line in the rearview mirror. But when our lives are studded with moments of awareness, when we pause to notice the way sunlight scatters through the leaves, or how laughter changes the air in a room, time begins to fragment into something richer, more textured. The road is no longer a straight, gray line. It is a winding path lined with details worth stopping for. And perhaps this is the great secret hidden in plain sight. Time feels shorter when we ignore it and longer when we honor it. By honoring it, we mean living as though each fragment of the present has its own weight and worth. Not just the milestones, not just the grand events, but the small, quiet intervals that seem too ordinary to matter. In truth, it is these small intervals that end up mattering most. The fleeting look from someone you love, the smell of your favorite book when you open it, the sound of rain against your window at 3 a.m. None of these are milestones, yet they stitch the fabric of our lives more tightly than most of the moments we think are important. But modern life does not make this easy. We live in an age where attention is constantly under siege, pulled in dozens of directions by glowing screens and restless schedules. Every ping, every notification, every demand for immediate response chips away at the spaciousness of the present moment. We are encouraged to move faster, think faster, produce faster, and in doing so, we begin to experience time less as an unfolding journey and more as a resource we're perpetually running out of. This constant urgency leaves little room for depth, for presence, for the kind of noticing that makes an hour feel like a day in memory. And yet, despite this, time has a strange way of bending in our favor when we choose to step outside the current. Even a few minutes of stillness, if we give ourselves fully to it, can feel like an entire afternoon of quiet peace. This is why moments of meditation, long walks without a destination, or even just sitting silently with a cup of tea can restore something we didn't realize we had lost. They remind us that while the clock's hands move at a fixed pace, our experience of those minutes is ours to shape. In this way, time is both unyielding and flexible. It will pass regardless, but how it passes within us is entirely our doing. The full, undiluted sense of the word, alive not merely in the biological sense, but awake in the experiential one, inhabiting each passing second as though it were the only second in existence. Because when you are truly in it, when you are not standing at a distance watching your life but rather feeling it unfold from the inside, the edges of time soften. Minutes do not slip through your fingers like dry sand. Instead, they take on the weight and texture of wet clay, malleable, tangible, something you can shape and hold before it hardens into memory. This is the paradox. The more we try to grip time tightly with schedules, clocks, and deadlines, the faster it escapes. But when we loosen our grip, when we step into moments without measuring them, they expand, they open, and they linger long after they have passed. This is why people often remember childhood summers as endless and golden, even though those months were no longer than the summers we live through now. As children, we had not yet learned to divide the day into units of productivity, to measure worth in tasks completed, to evaluate the value of a moment by how much it advanced us toward some external goal. We simply lived, hours stretched into universes because our attention rested fully in whatever we were doing. A bike ride wasn't a half hour of exercise. It was an epic adventure. A puddle wasn't a passing inconvenience. It was a small ocean to be explored. That childlike immersion, that refusal to look at the clock, is the purest form of time mastery we ever possess, one that most of us forget as we grow older. But it is not lost forever. Even as adults, we can reclaim pieces of it if we are willing to be deliberate about our attention. We can choose to walk somewhere instead of rushing, to eat without a screen in front of us, to have a conversation without glancing at the time. We can remember that the most precious commodity we have is not actually time itself, but the quality of our time, how deeply we experience it before it turns into memory. Because here is the quiet truth that almost no one tells us. The difference between a life that feels long and one that feels short is rarely measured in years. It is measured in how many moments we actually showed up for. And in showing up, we slowly begin to undo one of the most subtle and dangerous illusions of modern life, that life is something happening later, after the next deadline, after the next achievement, after the next problem is solved. In reality, later is a mirage. There is only ever now, endlessly changing shape. The more we anchor ourselves to now, the more we discover that time is not something that slips away. It is something we can inhabit, fully, with all our senses open. And if we can learn to do that, then perhaps the ticking clock will stop feeling like a countdown and start feeling like a heartbeat. Because once you start to see time as a heartbeat instead of a ticking clock, the pace of your life begins to change in ways that feel almost supernatural. You notice the way a shaft of sunlight moves across the floor over the course of an afternoon, how it starts pale and golden, then deepens into amber before fading into the soft gray of evening. You hear the subtle shift in the tone of someone's voice when they go from talking out of habit to speaking from a place of real feeling. You taste food differently, not as fuel to get you to the next task, but as a series of small, disappearing miracles that will never be exactly the same twice. And in these moments, you understand something profound, that life is not made of the years you live, but of the seconds you inhabit. Each one is a bead on a thread, and how you string them together is the art of a lifetime. The world will still try to pull you back into the trance of urgency. Emails will still arrive, deadlines will still loom, the clock will still turn. But you'll notice that when you've touched those deeper moments, when you've learned the texture of true presence, the noise loses some of its grip on you. It's as if you've stepped out of a raging river onto a quiet shore, not because the current has stopped, but because you've remembered you are not the water, you are the one watching it flow. This subtle shift changes everything. Instead of being dragged forward by the momentum of days, you begin to choose where you place your attention. You start to see that attention is the real currency of time. Spend it with care, and your life will feel rich no matter how many minutes are in it. And here's the quiet revelation that follows. Once you realize the power of presence, you don't need grand escapes or once-in-a-lifetime experiences to feel alive. You could be standing in line at a grocery store, listening to the hum of refrigerators and the faint shuffle of feet, and still feel the pulse of existence flowing through you. You could be washing dishes and watch the soap bubbles catch the light, turning each one into a tiny, iridescent planet spinning in its own gravity. You could be sitting with someone in silence, sharing nothing but the space between you, and feel as though you've been given a treasure no one else could possibly understand. That's the beauty of learning how to live in time instead of just passing through it. You stop waiting for the moment and realize this is the moment. Always. And when you truly grasp that this is the moment, something almost magical happens. You stop measuring your life by milestones and start measuring it by the depth of your awareness. Birthdays, promotions, achievements, and anniversaries are still beautiful markers, but they no longer define the worth of your days. Instead, you begin to treasure the in-between spaces, those overlooked fragments of existence where nothing important seems to happen, yet everything important does. You notice the warmth of your coffee cup against your palms on a cold morning. You hear the faint echo of rain tapping against the window before the storm fully arrives. You watch a stranger help another stranger pick up a dropped bag of groceries, and you feel an inexplicable sense of faith in people you'll never meet again. These are the invisible stitches that hold the fabric of your life together. Not the grand gestures, but the quiet continuities. And the strange thing is, once you lean into this way of seeing, you realize how much of your life has been slipping past unnoticed, like a song you were too distracted to hear. You remember conversations where you nodded and smiled but didn't really listen, meals you ate without tasting, sunsets you walked past without looking up. At first, this realization stings, a gentle ache for what you missed. But then, instead of drowning in regret, you find yourself softening toward the past. You understand that you can't go back and live those moments again, but you can live this one differently. You can turn your head toward the sun now. You can let the music in now. You can let the next conversation be one you fully inhabit. That's the redemption time offers. Not more of itself, but a renewed chance to be alive inside it. And it's in this redemption that a deeper truth emerges. Time is not the enemy. We like to blame it for our aging, for our losses, for the feeling that life is slipping away. But time is only the stage on which life unfolds. It is the silent witness, not the thief. The real thief is inattention. Every moment you spend lost in worry about the future or trapped in regret about the past is a moment stolen from the present. And once you see that clearly, you begin to protect your attention like the rarest of treasures. You begin to live as though every breath counts, because it does. You begin to love as though every touch might be the last, because one day it will be. You begin to speak as though your words might be the ones that echo in someone's mind forever, because they might. And when you live like that, time stops feeling like sand slipping through your fingers and starts feeling like gold you are actively shaping into the sculpture of your life. And when you live this way, with a sense of immediacy and reverence for each passing second, something within you begins to shift, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a subtle, almost imperceptible unfolding, like the way dawn slips into the sky without fanfare. You stop waiting for life to start, and realize it's been happening all along. In the pauses, in the ordinary, in the moments you once overlooked as filler. Even boredom changes its shape. What once felt like empty space becomes fertile ground. A breathing pause where your mind can stretch, wander, and connect as it never could in the chaos of constant distraction. You begin to see how much beauty hides in the repetition of your days. The same walk to the same place revealing a slightly different pattern of light. The same face revealing a slightly different expression. The same meal carrying the weight of different thoughts and feelings. The sameness is never truly the same because you are never truly the same. You are shaped by each moment you live through, whether you notice it or not, and when you start noticing, the transformation accelerates. Suddenly, you feel less like a passenger being carried along by the unstoppable current of time, and more like a diver, plunging beneath the surface to explore the richness beneath the waves. You find yourself slowing down in conversations, not to delay the end, but to savor the way voices rise and fall, the way someone's eyes light up when they talk about what matters to them. You start lingering a little longer at the end of the day, standing at the doorway or the balcony, watching the sky's colors fade into one another, knowing this exact combination of light will never return. You start laughing more easily, not because life has become funnier, but because you've stopped rushing past the small absurdities and coincidences that make it all so endearingly unpredictable. And as this awareness deepens, the fear of running out of time begins to fade, replaced by a quiet trust that even if the quantity of your moments is finite, the quality is something you can expand endlessly. Each second can be as wide as you allow it to be. Each heartbeat can carry more than just the mechanics of keeping you alive. It can carry gratitude, wonder, love, and the unshakable knowledge that you are, for now, here. And in being here, truly here, you start to understand that presence is not a mystical state reserved for monks or sages in distant mountains, but a choice available in the middle of a grocery store aisle, in the middle of a traffic jam, in the middle of a conversation you've had 100 times before, because presence isn't about where you are, it's about how you are. You notice the weight of your own hands as they rest in your lap, the rhythm of your breath as it fills your chest, the almost imperceptible pulse in your fingertips, And in these tiny observations you find a strange kind of abundance, a wealth that can't be measured in numbers or stored in banks. You start realizing that the moments you thought were too small to matter were the very fabric of your life, and the so-called big moments were only ever amplified versions of the small ones you'd been living all along. And in this realization, the urge to constantly chase the next milestone loosens its grip, because you've discovered that the meaning you were searching for isn't waiting for you in some distant tomorrow. It's layered into the texture of now. The sound of rain hitting the window becomes a symphony. The act of making tea becomes a ritual. The look in a friend's eyes becomes a mirror reflecting your own aliveness back to you. Even pain takes on a different tone. Not that it becomes pleasant, but it becomes integrated, seen as part of the larger story rather than a detour from it. You stop trying to skip chapters and start reading every sentence, every comma, every pause as if they're all essential to the plot. And in doing so, you notice that your relationships deepen. Not necessarily because others have changed, but because you've started showing up differently, listening not to reply but to hear, touching not out of habit but out of genuine connection, speaking not to fill silence but to honor it. Slowly, your days stop blurring together, and instead they start to feel like distinct beads on a string, each one carrying its own color, weight, and light, and you realize you're the one threading them together. This awareness doesn't make life perfect. It still has its storms, its losses, its aching absences, but it makes it undeniably yours, and there is a fierce kind of peace in that ownership, the peace of knowing that while you can't control the length of the story, you can shape the way each line is lived. And as you continue to live this way, something subtle yet profound begins to shift. Not in the world outside, which still spins with its chaos and noise, but in the landscape within you, which starts to feel less like a battlefield and more like a garden. You begin to see that every thought is a seed, every action a watering, and every moment of awareness a ray of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Some seeds will bloom into flowers, others into thorns, but both have their place. Both teach you something about the soil you're tending. You start to notice how much energy you used to spend resisting what was, clinging to what had been, or fearing what might be, and how that energy, when freed, flows naturally into the act of simply being alive. The pace of your mind slows, not in a way that makes you dull or passive, but in a way that makes you deliberate, like a painter choosing each stroke instead of splashing colors in panic. And in this slowed pace, beauty that once rushed past you now stays long enough for you to see it. The shifting light on a wall, the quiet determination of a plant growing through a crack in the pavement, the way someone's laughter changes the air around them. You realize that the small is not lesser than the grand, that a single deep breath can hold more than a lifetime of frantic striving, that gratitude is not something to be felt only when things are going well, but something that can coexist with grief, uncertainty, and even despair. And so, instead of waiting for life to get better before you let yourself live, you start living in the midst of it all, messy, unpredictable, raw. You stop treating the present moment as a stepping stone and start treating it as the destination. And in doing so you find a freedom that no achievement, possession, or approval could ever give you. This is the quiet revolution. Not escaping life, not conquering it, but inhabiting it so fully that even its ordinary moments start to feel extraordinary. And as this quiet revolution takes root, you begin to sense that the boundary between yourself and the world is far thinner than you once believed. Almost as if you are not moving through life, but that life itself is moving through you, like a current flowing through a riverbed, shaping you with each passing moment. The sounds around you, the murmur of distant voices, the soft rush of wind through leaves, the subtle hum of unseen machines, no longer feel like background noise but part of a single symphony in which you are both the listener and the played note. You feel less of a need to defend yourself against the world, less of a compulsion to build walls around your heart, because you see now that the very vulnerability you once feared is the bridge that allows connection, meaning, and love to cross into your life. And when pain comes, as it inevitably does, you no longer see it as an enemy to defeat but as a visitor with a message, perhaps unwanted but bearing a truth you need to hear, and you listen, not to indulge the suffering, but to understand what it is pointing toward. Slowly, without realizing when it began, you stop running from silence. Instead, you lean into it, You let it expand around you like a vast night sky in which every star is a thought, a memory, or a possibility, each one glowing for a moment before fading into stillness again. There is no rush to capture them all, because you understand now that life is not about holding on but about being present enough to truly witness. And the more you witness, the more the frantic weight of time seems to dissolve, as if the clock loses its tyranny and the only time that matters is the breath you are taking now. This is where you discover that peace is not found at the end of some long and winding road. It is not a prize, not a final destination. It is simply the act of stopping where you are, looking around, and realizing you are already inside it. And once you recognize that peace has been here all along, woven invisibly into the fabric of every ordinary moment, you begin to notice how differently you move through the world. Your steps are no longer hurried by the pressure to get somewhere else. Your hands no longer tremble from the need to grasp and keep. Your eyes no longer dart restlessly for the next distraction, because everything you need is quietly present in front of you. You find that conversations feel richer, because you are no longer half listening while thinking of what to say next. Instead, you let words arrive and settle before responding, like drops of rain landing on a still pond, rippling outward with meaning. The people around you sense the change too, not because you have announced it, but because there is a groundedness in your presence now, a steady warmth that makes others slow down without realizing it. Even in moments of chaos, you feel a subtle current of stillness running through you, as if beneath the crashing waves there is a deep ocean floor that nothing can disturb. You notice beauty in places you once overlooked. The way a street lamp flickers just before dawn, the worn grooves in a doorway touched by countless hands, the quiet courage in a stranger's smile. These details, once invisible in the blur of your rushing life, now stand like small altars reminding you that the sacred is hidden everywhere. And when you look back at the person you were, the one always searching, always chasing, always bracing against the possibility of loss, you do not judge them because you understand now they were only trying to find this very feeling. You realize that nothing was wasted, not the mistakes, not the heartbreaks, not the long nights of uncertainty, because each one was a turning stone, guiding you here, to this place where the need to run has fallen away. And in that stillness, you finally see it. The miracle was never somewhere else. It was always here, waiting for you to be still enough to notice. And as this realization deepens, you begin to see how even the smallest acts carry the weight of transformation. Pouring a cup of tea becomes a meditation on patience. Watching sunlight filter through a window becomes an invitation to breathe slower. Listening to the rustle of leaves becomes a reminder that life is constantly in motion, yet never truly rushed. You stop demanding that life fit into the tight shape of your expectations, and instead, you let it unfold as it wishes, like a river finding its own course. The more you release control, the more you notice that things often work themselves out without your anxious interference, as if there has always been a quiet intelligence guiding everything from the background. This doesn't mean you no longer face challenges. Storms still come, losses still cut deep, but you no longer believe these moments are evidence that something is wrong with life. Rather, you see them as part of its rhythm, the way night balances day and winter balances summer. Even grief takes on a strange beauty, because beneath it is proof of love, and you realize that to feel deeply, even when it hurts, is a privilege not everyone allows themselves. There's a tenderness that grows in you now, a gentleness toward others and toward yourself, as if you understand that everyone you meet is carrying unseen burdens and searching for their own place of rest. You stop rushing conversations, stop offering quick solutions, and instead, you give your presence fully, knowing sometimes that is the only thing a person needs. And slowly, you understand that this way of living, present, unguarded, and open, isn't about changing who you are, but about returning to who you've always been, before fear taught you to run and before the noise of the world convinced you that peace was somewhere far away. It's not a finish line, but a homecoming, and every moment from here on feels like a step through the door you've been searching for all along. And once you step through that unseen door, you begin to notice how the air feels lighter, how even familiar places look subtly transformed, as though you are seeing them for the first time without the fog of constant striving clouding your eyes. You realize that the streets you've walked 1,000 times hold infinite stories you never noticed. The way the cracks in the pavement form maps of journeys unknown. The way strangers pass carrying entire universes of memories and dreams. the way the sky's color shifts in a slow dance you had always been too busy to watch. Every sound becomes a kind of music, the hum of distant traffic like a low drumbeat, the call of a bird like a single flute note, the whisper of wind through branches weaving harmonies you didn't know you were aching to hear. In this state, time itself begins to lose its grip on you. Hours stretch or collapse without the pressure of productivity measuring their worth, and instead of chasing moments, you allow them to arrive in their own time, like guests you welcome without agenda. Even in silence, you find a fullness you used to search for in noise, as though the quiet holds more answers than the clamor ever did. You notice how your body moves differently now, less in reaction and more in response. Every gesture slower, softer, as if each action has been granted the respect of intention. The world, too, seems to respond differently to you, not because it has changed, but because you have, and now you meet it with a gaze that doesn't demand or resist, only receives. You start to see beauty where you once saw inconvenience. A delayed train becomes an unexpected pause to watch the sunset. A rainy day becomes a reason to curl into the warmth of your own company. A wrong turn becomes an unplanned adventure. And through it all, you begin to understand that life's meaning was never in the grand achievements or the distant destinations, but in these ordinary, fleeting, unrepeatable moments that bloom and fade with or without your permission, asking only that you notice them before they are gone. And as you continue to notice them, something remarkable happens. You begin to trust that you don't need to grip so tightly to every plan, every expectation, every imagined future, because life has a way of arranging itself in patterns more intricate and beautiful than anything you could design alone. This trust doesn't come all at once. It unfurls quietly, like the first green shoot breaking through soil, fragile yet unstoppable. You stop rushing toward outcomes and start living inside the unfolding, finding that the in-between spaces, the waiting, the uncertainty, the pauses are often the most alive. You realize that the moments you once dismissed as insignificant were actually the threads that wove your life's most profound connections. The lingering smile exchanged with a stranger in passing, the taste of a meal cooked without hurry, the sound of rain tapping against your window on a sleepless night. You begin to see that joy is not a prize you earn by surviving hardship, but a current that runs through everything, even sorrow, if you are willing to let it flow. You feel less compelled to chase things simply because the world says they matter, and more drawn to the small rituals that make your days quietly radiant. The morning stretch, the slow sip of tea, the familiar path beneath your feet that somehow feels different every day. And somewhere in this shift, you stop measuring your worth by how much you've done or how far you've gone, and instead by how deeply you've allowed yourself to be here, now, in the only moment you truly have. It's here, in this deep and unassuming presence, that you discover the world has been whispering to you all along, waiting for you to finally listen. And when you finally listen, really listen, you notice that the whispers aren't just coming from the world outside but from somewhere deep within you. A voice you had long silenced under the noise of deadlines, obligations, and the endless chase to be somewhere else. It speaks in a language of feelings rather than words, nudging you toward what feels expansive, warm, and alive, and away from what feels constricted, heavy, and draining. You start to realize that this inner voice has always been there, tracing the outlines of your truest path, but you were too busy measuring yourself against the pace of others to hear it clearly. Now, instead of drowning it out, you give it room. Quiet mornings where thoughts wander like clouds, long walks without headphones, moments where you let stillness be your only companion. In this space, even your memories begin to look different. Things you once thought of as failures now reveal themselves as necessary turning points, and times you labeled as wasted are suddenly rich with hidden growth. You begin to sense that nothing was ever truly random. Every detour, every loss, every unexpected meeting was part of a wider weaving that you could not yet see. This changes how you move forward. You no longer strain to predict or control every twist in the road, because you understand that the beauty is in discovering where it bends. Life stops feeling like something you have to wrestle into shape and starts feeling like a river you can trust to carry you. And in trusting it, you also learn to trust yourself, not the self others expect you to be, but the one you meet in the quiet, the one who knows that there is no rush to arrive because you were never separate from where you were meant to be. You carry this trust into your days like a secret compass, guiding you even in moments when the sky seems overcast and the path ahead is unclear, and it changes the way you interact with the world. Suddenly, conversations are no longer just exchanges of information but delicate bridges built between hearts. Moments of laughter are not distractions from seriousness but vital threads in the fabric of your life. And even the smallest gestures, like holding the door for a stranger or noticing the way sunlight turns dust into tiny constellations, feel like sacred acts that ripple far beyond what you can see. You start to notice that people are drawn to you differently now, not because you are trying to impress them, but because there is something unspoken in your presence, a quiet steadiness and openness that makes others feel safe to be themselves. And you, in turn, are less concerned with being understood and more concerned with understanding. You realize that most of the time people aren't asking for solutions, they're asking to be witnessed, to have their inner world acknowledged without judgment. In embracing this, you also begin to extend the same grace to yourself, letting go of the harsh inner narratives that once dictated every choice and replacing them with gentler, more patient truths. The days are still imperfect, of course. The rain still falls when you planned for sun. People still disappoint, fears still whisper from the corners. But your relationship to it all has shifted. The storms don't feel like punishments anymore. They feel like seasons, necessary for the soil of your soul to remain fertile. And maybe this is what it means to truly live. Not in constant pursuit of happiness as some distant, glittering prize, but in the deep, steady knowing that even the messy, unpolished moments are part of the treasure. And so, without even realizing it, you stop clinging to the idea that life must be neatly ordered to be beautiful, and you begin to see the poetry in its chaos. The way plans fall apart only to reveal a path you never would have chosen but somehow needed. The way heartbreak cracks you open so that light can seep into places you didn't know were dark. The way loss teaches you the value of what remains, and the way time, that elusive current you once tried to control, carries you forward whether you resist or surrender. You start trusting that not every answer needs to arrive on your schedule, that sometimes the waiting itself is the transformation, and that patience is not a passive state but an act of quiet courage. This changes the way you measure progress. You no longer count only the tangible achievements, but the moments of stillness you can hold without restlessness, the times you can sit with uncertainty without demanding it resolve, the gentle self-corrections that turn reaction into reflection. You stop needing every moment to be spectacular because you realize that life's brilliance is often hidden in its subtlety, in the unremarkable afternoons, in the conversations that don't seem profound until years later, in the way your own breath sounds when you pause long enough to hear it. And in this quieter rhythm, you begin to notice how the world itself seems to conspire in your favor. Not in grand, cinematic gestures, but in tiny alignments. A friend calling at the exact moment you need reassurance. A song playing that feels like it's speaking directly to you. A stranger's kindness when you're sure the day has nothing left to give. It becomes clear that the more you let go of control, the more life surprises you with exactly what you didn't know you were searching for. You realize that much of what you once called luck was simply your openness meeting opportunity, your willingness to be present meeting life exactly where it is, rather than where you thought it should be, and that this openness is a skill, one you can practice, refine, and nurture over a lifetime. You start to see how resistance only tightens the knots you're trying to untangle, while acceptance loosens them effortlessly. And in that loosening, you discover a freedom that was never about circumstances changing but about your relationship to them transforming. You begin to live less like a strategist trying to outsmart fate and more like a traveler who trusts the road, who knows that detours often hold the most breathtaking views, and who understands that even the delays are part of the arrival. With each passing day, your definition of success becomes less about acquisition and more about alignment. About whether your inner world feels at peace with the outer one, whether you can meet each moment without demanding it be something else, whether you can love yourself even when you're unfinished. You stop asking life to be fair and start asking yourself to be present, because you finally grasp that presence is the only place where life actually happens. Not in the replay of yesterday, not in the anticipation of tomorrow, but here in this inhale, in this heartbeat, in this exact point on the map of your existence. And the more you anchor yourself in this awareness, the more you notice that even your struggles contain a strange kind of beauty, that grief sharpens your gratitude, that loneliness deepens your capacity for connection, that uncertainty keeps you awake to possibility, and that imperfection, far from being a flaw, is the very thing that makes life vivid, textured, and real. And in this realization, you begin to treat time differently. Not as an enemy chasing you down or a currency you must spend before it's gone, but as a vast, flowing river in which you are both the traveler and the water itself, moving with and within the current rather than thrashing against it. You start to understand that rushing only blinds you to the details that make each moment sacred. The way light scatters across a table in the late afternoon, the sound of someone's laughter breaking the silence, the small kindness of a stranger that leaves an echo long after they're gone. And so you slow down, not out of laziness but out of reverence. You let go of the belief that your life must unfold according to a grand plan to have meaning, and instead you see that meaning is stitched into every fragment, that there is no wasted day if you were awake for even a part of it. You realize that healing is not a destination you suddenly arrive at but a garden you tend endlessly, sometimes finding blooms, sometimes only bare soil, and that both are part of the same tending. You begin to forgive yourself for the times you couldn't see clearly, for the mistakes you made when you didn't know better, for the ways you tried to hold on to people and moments that were never meant to stay, and in doing so, you lighten the weight you've been carrying without even realizing it. You start to live as though every conversation could be the last, every touch could be the final one. Not in a morbid way but in a way that makes you cherish them more fiercely, because you finally understand that nothing in this life is truly repeatable. Not the words, not the glances, not even the breaths. And that this is precisely what makes them precious beyond measure. And when you carry this awareness with you, even the most ordinary routines, making tea in the morning, folding laundry, stepping outside to feel the cool air on your face, become imbued with a kind of quiet magic, as if the world is constantly whispering, "Look, this is it, this is the miracle you were waiting for." You begin to notice how fleeting moments are not something to grieve, but to marvel at, because their impermanence is the very thing that sharpens their beauty. The sunset would not burn so deeply into your memory if it lingered forever. The hug would not warm your heart in the same way if you could return to it at will. The laughter would not echo so sweetly in your chest if you could replay it endlessly. And in this understanding, you no longer feel the need to grip so tightly, to clutch at people, experiences, or outcomes, because you see that letting them move through you like the tide does not mean losing them, but rather honoring them in their purest form. Life becomes less about having and more about being, less about stockpiling moments and more about standing fully inside them while they happen, unshielded and awake. You stop waiting for the right time to live, because you understand there is no later, no perfect alignment of stars, only the now that is already whole. And strangely, this loosening of control does not make life feel smaller. It makes it feel boundless, as if you have stepped out of a narrow hallway into an open field, where the sky stretches wider than you thought possible and the air carries the scent of 1,000 unknown futures, each one unfolding exactly as it should. And in that boundless space, you start to understand that meaning is not something hidden, waiting to be uncovered like a secret treasure at the end of a long quest, but something you weave moment by moment through your attention, your choices, your presence. You realize that even the smallest gestures, holding the door for a stranger, sending a message to check on a friend, smiling at the child staring at you in the grocery store, are threads in a tapestry far larger than you can see, and that the pattern you are creating is not measured in grand achievements, but in the quiet, consistent ways you show up for life. The more you lean into this, the less you feel the frantic push to prove yourself to some invisible scoreboard, because you can feel, deep down, that you are already participating in something vast and interconnected. You notice how your mood can ripple outward into the world, how a single kind word can change the arc of someone's day, and how even the pain you carry can be transformed into compassion that reaches further than you may ever know. And so you begin to live with a kind of deliberate softness, not the weakness that the world warns against, but the kind that takes immense strength, because it chooses openness in a world that often teaches us to armor up. This is where the shift happens. You stop seeing life as a race with a finish line and start seeing it as a dance you are lucky enough to be part of, where the point is not to arrive anywhere, but to feel the music, to move in step with it, to let it carry you through moments of joy and moments of ache, knowing both are part of the same song. And when you live like this, you find yourself less afraid of endings, because you see that every ending is also a transformation, and that nothing beautiful is ever truly lost. It only changes shape, waiting to meet you again in another form. And with that understanding, you begin to loosen your grip on the illusion of control, realizing that so much of life is not about bending the world to your will, but about learning to move with its currents, to read the subtle signs in its shifting tides, and to trust that even when you cannot see the path ahead, there is a rhythm to it all that you are a part of. You start to notice how the moments you once dismissed as trivial are often the ones that echo the loudest in your memory. An unexpected laugh in the middle of a heavy day, the way sunlight once fell across your childhood bedroom, the smell of rain as it begins to fall on warm pavement. These are not background noise. They are the essence of the story you are living. And so you practice being here, fully unapologetically here, because you understand that this breath, this heartbeat, this fleeting arrangement of the world as it is right now, will never exist again in exactly the same way. You stop postponing joy for some imagined future when you have earned it, and instead let it slip into your days like sunlight through an open window. You learn to forgive yourself for the years you spent running after things that did not matter, because those years, too, brought you here, taught you what you now know. And in the quiet of this acceptance, life feels less like something to master and more like something to hold gently, with gratitude for its impermanence. You realize that you are not here to outpace time but to walk with it, to feel its texture, to let it shape you as you shape it, until one day, when your story comes to its final line, you can look back and know that you were truly, deeply alive in every chapter. And with that understanding, you begin to loosen your grip on the illusion of control, realizing that so much of life is not about bending the world to your will, but about learning to move with its currents, to read the subtle signs in its shifting tides, and to trust that even when you cannot see the path ahead, there is a rhythm to it all that you are a part of. You start to notice how the moments you once dismissed as trivial are often the ones that echo the loudest in your memory. An unexpected laugh in the middle of a heavy day, the way sunlight once fell across your childhood bedroom, the smell of rain as it begins to fall on warm pavement. These are not background noise. They are the essence of the story you are living. And so you practice being here, fully unapologetically here, because you understand that this breath, this heartbeat, this fleeting arrangement of the world as it is right now, will never exist again in exactly the same way. You stop postponing joy for some imagined future when you have earned it, and instead let it slip into your days like sunlight through an open window. You learn to forgive yourself for the years you spent running after things that did not matter, because those years, too, brought you here, taught you what you now know. And in the quiet of this acceptance, life feels less like something to master and more like something to hold gently, with gratitude for its impermanence. You realize that you are not here to outpace time but to walk with it, to feel its texture, to let it shape you as you shape it, until one day, when your story comes to its final line, you can look back and know that you were truly, deeply alive in every chapter. And in that peace, you begin to notice how the world feels different, not because it has changed, but because you have. Colors seem deeper, conversations seem fuller, even silence feels richer, like a warm blanket instead of an empty void. You start to cherish the pauses between moments, the in-between spaces where nothing important